Welcome to the Florida Divorce Podcast, your source for the information you need to successfully get through your divorce and into the next exciting chapter of life. Now, here's your host, Attorney Scott Kalish.
Hey everybody, my name is Scott Kalish and I am a divorce and family law attorney here in South Florida. Today I want to talk to you about alimony and retirement. Again, this episode is not for everyone, right? It's only going to apply to a limited number of people, but I think the people that are going to find this interesting or applicable are going to find that this is helpful, right? Because this is a topic that I come across that is pretty important for those that have this issue, right? So let's talk about alimony and retirement and how the two interplay. In short, though, just at a very high level, people in Florida have a right to retire and alimony laws respect it, right? So you're not going to be forced to work for the rest of your life, well into your 70s, 80s, 90s, just because there could be an alimony obligation, right? So the right to retire in Florida is strong, and it got stronger last year after the law change in 2023, after the legislature updated the alimony laws as it relates to alimony and retirement. They definitely got stronger and they definitely got more clear. So let me kind of go into that. So briefly, from a very high level, yes, you have a right to retire in Florida, and you going into retirement can form the basis, right, to terminate or modify an alimony award, right? So let me give you an example of a case or, situation where this topic comes into play, or this situation comes into play rather. So let's say the spouses are both 60 years old and they've been married for 30 years, right? So they got married when they were 30 and they're now 60 and they're wanting to divorce. And let's say that the one spouse, let's say the husband has been the breadwinner for the entire marriage. And, the wife really depends on alimony. So, and the husband has the ability to pay, the wife has a need. So now we're talking about amount of alimony. We're also talking about duration, right? So under Florida law, the wife would be entitled to what's called durational alimony for up to 75% of the marriage, right? So 30 years times 75% is 22 and a half years, right? So that would make the husband 82 and a half, right? So people ask me, well, I'm supposed to retire in 5 years at 65. Am I going to have to work until I'm 82 and a half, almost 83 years old, right, to pay all of this alimony? And my answer is no, right? If I'm representing either person, right? If I'm representing either party, I'm letting them know, hey, this is what the law is, right? So under Florida law, you have the right to retire. So let's say in 5 years, when the husband's 65, can he go back to court and modify his alimony or terminate his alimony based on going into retirement? Yes, he can. When can you file that action, right? So you can basically file the case right up to 6 months prior to retiring. So if you're going to retire in June, right, of the year, you can go into court in January and say, hey, judge, raise your hand. Hey, judge, I'm going to retire, and then, restart your case and move to have the amount of alimony either terminated or modified, right? How long do the cases take? Typically, well, cases can take, 6 months, 9 months, a year. Could take even longer than a year if they're complex or if they're very contested, right? It can take even longer. How about this? Just because one of the spouses retired, does it automatically mean that the judge is going to automatically terminate or modify alimony? No, not necessarily. What do I mean? Well, what happens in cases? Well, in cases where, let's say, one spouse has a substantial, portfolio, or has substantial retirement assets, or has some sort of like passive income stream, then their income might still be at a level to where they still could afford alimony. So let's say the alimony payment is $5,000. If they still have, let's say, a $5,000 surplus, then that case might not be the best case to terminate, right? Maybe it's a case to modify. If you can show that your expenses are increasing, or that your cost of living went up a little bit involuntarily, right? Maybe your mortgage went up because the taxes went up, right? And that's going to eat up some of the surplus. But if you have substantial retirement assets and a large income, then you still might have to pay alimony, right? And that could, if you're on the other side of that, that could be your defense to your spouse's, right, or your ex-spouse's action to modify alimony or terminate alimony. You might be like, well, they're still, netting $20,000 a month. I mean, that's an extreme example from, their portfolio investments. So it depends on the situation, but the judge goes through a variety of factors. They're in the statute 61.14 Florida statute, right? The judge has to go through the factors when they're presented with this issue, right? They look at the age and health of the person paying alimony, the nature and type of work performed by the person paying alimony, the customary age of retirement of the person paying alimony, the obligor, right? The person paying alimony's motivation for retirement and likelihood of returning to work. They think if the judge thinks this is just a ruse, that the person's, technically 65, but they're a workhorse and they're always going to be working. And this is just some sort of ruse or game that the person's playing just to get their alimony modified or terminated. And there's evidence that they're going back to work. The court could take that into consideration. The needs of the obligee, person that actually is getting the alimony paid to them, and the ability of the receiving spouse to contribute toward his or her own basic needs, right? If you can prove, if you're paying alimony, if you can prove the person that's receiving alimony can get a job and, or get a better job and make more money to contribute to his or her basic needs, then that's something that's relevant for the court to decide. The court looks at all assets of the person receiving alimony and the assets that the person paying alimony acquired prior to the marriage, during the marriage, or following dissolution of the marriage, right? When there's a final judgment. The court looks at the income of the person receiving alimony and the person paying alimony during the marriage or following the entry of the final judgment, right? So any Social Security benefits, retirement plan benefits, pension benefits payable to the obligor and the obligee following the final judgment of dissolution. And then the obligor's, right, the person paying alimony's compliance in whole or in part with the existing alimony obligation, right? So that's relevant. So the court looks at a variety of factors and then makes the decision, hey, are we going to terminate it? Are we going to modify it? But if you have the classic case of I'm 60 years old, and you retire at 65, but, your court obligated you to pay 20 years and you're just a regular person and have I would say a modest retirement income, right? Maybe you get some Social Security, maybe you get some pension or distributions from 401k or an IRA or something, and it's all modest, right? And you have just enough to live and no excess, and you don't have that working income anymore, then you have a good case to modify or terminate alimony based on retirement. No one's going to require you to keep working until you're 95 years old. So important for you to know. Again, the law strengthened last year in 2023, or now almost 2 years ago, because you're listening to this in 2025. So just know that the law is now on the side of people retiring. If you're not the person that's retiring, if you're the person that's receiving it, I would say if you're in a divorce right now and this episode scares you, make a play, I think, right? Obviously consult with your lawyer. This isn't like specific legal advice for you. This is more generally speaking, right? But like in those types of cases, if I'm thinking about alimony and I'm representing someone like you and retirement is on the horizon, it's going to come sooner than later, and that scares you, then lump sum alimony is something to consider. What is lump sum alimony? Well, lump sum alimony is basically like, hey, instead of getting all of the payments over the course of, let's say, a number of years, you negotiate for a big lump sum payment up front. Now, that might be harder to do in a case like this because the attorney on the other side is going to probably be wise to why you're doing it and say, well, why are you going to pay for a huge lump sum that is really meant to be paid over a time period of like 20 years? Why are you going to agree to a large sum up front when I know that my client is going to be retiring in, let's say, 4 or 5 years? Probably not going to be extremely likely, but it's a play that you can make. And it might make sense. It might be the most financially secure thing to do. I'm in a way to mitigate some risk there. So there's that in terms of defending against something like this. So that's alimony and retirement. Some things that you should know. If you like this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. If you have a question, feel free to ask me, and if you want to email your question to scott@kjlawfla.com. If you want to ask, me to answer it or do an episode on this, I'm happy to do it. On the question, I'm happy to do it. Every once in a while, people call me and they consult and they say, oh yeah, listen to your podcast. You should record an episode on this. And I do, right? I don't always say it on the podcast, but I do. If you're interested in possible representation, give us a call. My number is 561-208-1859. Again, 561-208-1859. Ask to speak with Vanessa. She can, do a quick discovery call with you and determine whether or not we're a good fit for you. And if you're a good fit for us, she'll throw you on the my calendar for a consult, or maybe my law partner's calendar, and we'd be happy to speak with you. Again, thank you for listening, and I look forward to the next one. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Florida Divorce Podcast. To learn the 10 secrets behind every successful divorce, visit floridadivorcepodcast.com. If you'd like Scott's help in your divorce case, go to kjlawfla.com.